This is the talk today, and I'm going to be sharing what the photon has to do with building better software and living the good life. So my name is Whitney Tennant. I'm the engineering manager at an amazing company called Viperdev, and it's my first time in Brazil. Yeah. If I have like butterflies, and if I'd eaten some pão de queijo, I'd probably have less. So I'm South African. I live in Cape Town, and you can find me on Twitter at Wits for the Win. I really love tech and art and philosophy, and so my company, they knew that I liked drawing, and they got me a Wacom drawing tablet. So you guys are now getting to see the result of what happens when you let me alone with one of those things. So. Okay, so what I'm going to talk about is kind of like an intersection between physics and philosophy, things that parallels that I've found between them. And for the most part, this is just a story. It's an analogy where I'm talking about wave-particle duality and how the modern concept of the self limits us, how we can alter situations with a new worldview, and why we should care about creating a network with differing opinions. So I think that analogies are particularly important for us in the tech community. It's really important because we work in such an abstract space, so when we learn new things, it's important to have mental models in order to hinge our understanding of it. So I'm a software developer, and I'm talking to you about my experience as such, and somebody helping run a software development company, and as somebody interested in seeing the way that we view the world, how that can actually change it. So the story starts here with Max Planck. It was the start of where physics started to get a little bit strange. He discovered the quantum, which is an individual packet of energy. And what he discovered was that light can only be emitted or absorbed by matter in small bits, bundled up into various sizes. Previously, everybody thought that matter could only be, or energy could only be emitted or absorbed continuously, like water flowing from a tap. And in 1927, it was Einstein who was the first to suggest that light quanta, which got renamed to the photon, possess momentum, which is a particle-like quality. Einstein said that both the wave theory of light and the quantum theory of light were in some ways valid. The photon could not be used to explain wave phenomena that is associated with light, such as interference and diffraction. And conversely, the photoelectric effect could not be proved without the quantum or particle theory of light. So light is a dual wave particle character, which physicists just had to kind of accept. Wave-particle duality showed us mathematically that even in physics, which is the queen of the hard sciences, that things are extremely nuanced, and depending on how we choose to observe them, there's different properties. So humans are kind of similar to photons in this way. We're bundles of different energies, emotions, tendencies, dispositions. And what I've learned from physics is that the world is a messy chaos made up of lots of small interactions and these interactions draw out certain emotions within us, and we respond to them accordingly. So you'll notice different aspects of our behavior in different conditions. This has a lot of implications for the everyday. We tend to think of ourselves as relatively isolated from other people, but our moods and actions have repercussions not only in the interactions themselves, but in the way that we see ourselves. So, though we are discrete, separate units, we resonate with and affect others. And consequently, we're indivisible from society, and we're characterized by our relationships and behavior with others. This is, of course, how we get to know ourselves, not as in a vacuum, but within the world and in society. So, you'll notice this parallel between the individual and community, the network, which is consisting of nodes, and the patterns constructing, which is the relationships between the parts. So I'd like to just talk about this idea that, so when you're in a team, every day you're pulled to and fro continuously in different situations. And we have default modes of reacting to these, which are our standard patterns. So we typically talk about ourselves, we'll say stuff like, I'm just hot-tempered, or I'm shy. But this is actually just a rut or an emotional pattern. And we have a tendency to think of this as our true nature. But this is part of our culture where they say, you're supposed to love and accept yourself for the good parts and the bad. And I think partially this is nonsense. We have plenty to improve on, and our language shouldn't support thinking of us as immutable. So this is, again, the whole particle wave thing, is people think of themselves as very static and a snapshot of yourself, but in reality we're far more dynamic. So knowing this, we can approach situations slightly differently. We can try to break away from thinking of other people as fixed, static humans, and we can try to think about how we can change other people's default patterns. And in so doing, you can try to train yourself to change your own patterns yourself, so that you don't react the same normal way that you would normally. So let's take, for example, that you have a bad-tempered developer that you work with. And this relationship may negatively affect the way that you see your value. Like assholes have a blast radius. And you tend to avoid that person, but maybe things could get better. So you do some stalking, and you find out that they really like Monty Python or cat memes or something. And so you start including some GIFs in your pull requests, which make them laugh, and you figure out you can approach the situation from a different angle. So instead of just shutting yourself off from them because they're grumpy, you can see a different side and try to alter the situation for the better. So what I'm suggesting is that we try to stop thinking of ourselves as so separate from other people, and stop focusing on ourselves alone, but rather learn about ourselves by improving the patterns that characterize our interactions. So every interaction with others is an opportunity to cultivate ourselves, and as such, to improve the collective whole. So what does this have to do with building better software? Well, it's good for us to change our perspectives and to see the world through a different set of analogies. People rarely talk about cultivating and improving relationships and seeing the effect of how our impressions impact others. And this is important because the work of engineers these days is almost in every single industry, and the scope of our influence is huge. In propelling change and altering our belief systems and culture, technology has joined the religion, tradition, and family in the scope of its influence. And since developers now have this additional layer of responsibility and complexity, we need people from different social backgrounds. We need to be more inclusive. And developers need to be more worldly and empathetic, and understanding of how what they do produces effects for their users and their lives, but also how it affects your team and the company that you're part of. So you can think of it almost like building a city. In urban planning, they don't just let one person build a city. So imagine if you had just one person, like a businessman who's very efficient, likes earning money. You suddenly find that this person is just building roads and is not concerned about pedestrian walkways, and these things that are normal in society, like old people who are wise, are now suddenly seen as hindrances because they walk slowly. So if you have these people that are just very static and we're not growing ourselves, then it causes a problem, because the stuff that we're dealing with is just far too complex. So they protect against this kind of thing by bringing in all sorts of different people, different walks of life, and we need people who are sensitive to particular social issues and different points of view. Doing this can help our problem solving, because if we have different ways of solving problems, we're more likely to engage and solve them in unique ways. So we've long since recognized that the world's best engineering feats are executed by teams and not by singularly brilliant and lone developers. So this means we need to figure out how to improve collaboration. And working in software development, there's a lot of people who can be quite snobby and elitist, and we only have a few representations of what a good developer is. You know, that person has to be very efficient and ship code fast and whatever. And that's good, but I'm also suggesting that we need to have a more nuanced approach. So part of the problem with that is that there's no metrics for these things, and developers often complain that, you know, they don't have time to do this. You know, it's taking it to develop the community, to develop the team. It's a constant trade-off between their work and supporting the community. But this is indicative of a broken system, and it's its own form of technical debt. So what I'm suggesting in some ways is just to open up the conversation and to try to be more playful about the way that we think about what additional things people could be doing in the teams. So the point of the previous topics is to encourage balance. We ideally want to explore different sides of ourselves. So as software developers, we maybe have a tendency to be very analytical, and that kind of makes you look at every situation from an analytical point of view. So there's a saying in English, like, if you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So we need to try to develop skills in a company that, like, if you're speaking to a client, you're going to need to use your intuition to figure out their needs. If you're speaking to an intern, you're going to need to be more empathetic. So I don't think that developers should be groomed to just be exercising this very analytical side of themselves. So we need to talk about having different models of what a good developer is. And I guess in some ways I'm trying to talk about developing, so like start different projects within your company. Try to decentralize it, take it away from your manager. Your manager might not be able to understand the characteristics within yourself that help you achieve a state of flow. And you know, these days there's only certain roles. There's like team lead and senior software developer. Maybe we need to try to be thinking of more roles in the in-between. And that you can do by starting smaller little projects within your company. You know, as a developer, I never really thought about my trajectory going forward or career planning or anything. I just kind of thought to myself, well, I'll work at a company for a minimum of 2 years, and if I find a really great company, I'll work for a little longer, and eventually I'll learn enough that I'll magically turn into the kind of person that becomes a team lead. And like, this is just a very unstructured approach, you know. I know we don't often think about these things, but maybe we could just be starting with smaller projects and like, don't wait for somebody to tell you, start a knowledge sharing session at the company. Just do it, because there's different sides of yourself that you can explore. So I don't really have any specific answers. All I'm saying is that we should expand the vision of ourselves and our impact within micro-communities, within people you work with. So it's an iterative approach, and you know, every day is just a series of messy interactions. We're just a bundle of emotions, tendencies, patterns, and figuring out how you can contribute to other people's lives can you know, propagate this change going forward. So most of the phenomena that we deal with in our professional and personal lives has to do with living systems. I use this idea of analogies a lot because it's really relevant. Like if we're able to think about and characterize the way we view the world, we're able to look at other disciplines and see what they can add to us. So a great example today is society. It's an example of a complex system. And a complex system is one that can be described as a system that has, you can't use a single language to define it. You know, you need all sorts of different definitions, truths, angles, people to evaluate it. And if we start looking at other disciplines like biology and theories about evolution, we can potentially learn more about systems that cannot be understood in isolation, and systems where things are interconnected and interdependent. So, because the difference between humans and animals lies in our ability to collaborate, engage in business, formulate ideas. Collaboration has an explosive upside, and it's like a super additive mathematical function where 1 + 1 equals way more than 2. And this has explosive benefits. So, since you cannot forecast collaborations and you cannot direct them, you cannot see where the world is going, all we can do is create an environment that facilitates these collaborations and lay the foundation for prosperity. Thanks.